Days in Changsha. Mao Zedong continued. I began to long to go to Changsha, the great city, the capital of the province, which was 120 li from my home. It was said that this city was very big, contained many, many people, numerous schools, and the yama of the governor. It was a magnificent place altogether. I wanted very much to go there at this time, and enter the middle school for Shangshang people. That winter I asked one of my teachers in the higher primary school to introduce me there. The teacher agreed, and I walked to Changsha, exceedingly excited, half fearing that I would be refused entrance, hardly daring to hope that I could actually become a student in this great school. To my astonishment, I was admitted without difficulty. But political events were moving rapidly and I was to remain there only half a year. In Changsha I read my first newspaper, Minli Pao People's Strength, a nationalist revolutionary journal which told of the Canton uprising against the Manchu dynasty and the death of the 72 heroes, under the leadership of a Hunanese named Huang Xing. I was most impressed with this story and found the Minli Pao full of stimulating material. It was edited by Yu Zhen, who later became a famous leader of the Kuomintang. I learned also of Sun Yat-sen at this time, and of the program of the Tiananmenhui. The country was on the eve of the first revolution. I was so agitated that I wrote an article, which I posted on the school wall. It was my first expression of a political opinion, and it was somewhat muddled. I had not yet given up my admiration of Kang Yue and Liang Chicho. I did not clearly understand the differences between them. Therefore in my article I advocated that Sun Yat-sen must be called back from Japan to become president of the new government, that Kang Yue be made premier, and Liang Chicho Minister of Foreign Affairs. The anti-foreign capital movement began in connection with the building of the Sichuan-Hankou Railway, and a popular demand for a parliament became widespread. In reply to it, the emperor decreed merely that an advisory council be created. The students in my school became more and more agitated. They demonstrated their anti-Manchu sentiments by a rebellion against the pigtail. One friend and I clipped off our pigtails, but others, who had promised to do so, afterward failed to keep their word. My friend and I therefore assaulted them in secret and forcibly removed their queues, a total of more than 10 falling victim to our shears. Thus in a short space of time I had progressed from ridiculing the false foreign devil's imitation queue to demanding the general abolition of queues. How a political idea can change a point of view. I got in a dispute with a friend in a law school over the pigtail episode, and we each advanced opposing theories on the subject. The law student held that the body, skin, hair, and nails are heritages from one's parents and must not be destroyed, quoting the classics to clinch his argument. But I myself and the anti-pigtailers developed a counter-theory, on an anti-Manchu political basis, and thoroughly silenced him. After the Wen uprising occurred, led by Li Yuanheng, martial law was declared in Hunan. The political scene rapidly altered. One day a revolutionary appeared in the middle school and made a stirring speech, with the permission of the principal. 7 or 8 students arose in the assembly and supported him with vigorous denunciation of the Manchus, and calls for action to establish the republic. Everyone listened with complete attention. Not a sound was heard as the order of the revolution. One of the officials of Li Yuanheng spoke before the excited students. 4 or 5 days after hearing this speech I determined to join the revolutionary army of Li Yuanheng. I decided to go to Hankou with several other friends, and we collected some money from our classmates. Having heard that the streets of Hankou were very wet, and that it was necessary to wear rain shoes, I went to borrow some from a friend in the army, who was quartered outside the city. I was stopped by the garrison guards. The place had become very active. The soldiers had for the first time been furnished with bullets, and they were pouring into the streets. Rebels were approaching the city along the Canton-Hankou Railway, and fighting had begun. A big battle occurred outside the city walls of Changsha. There was at the same time an insurrection within the city, and the gates were stormed and taken by Chinese laborers. Through one of the gates I re-entered the city. Then I stood on a high place and watched the battle, until at last I saw the Han asterisk flag raised over the Yama. It was a white banner with the character Han in it. I returned to my school, to find it under military guard. On the following day, a Tutu government was organized. 2 prominent members of the Gelaohui Elder Brother Society were made Tutu and Vice Tutu. These were Chao Feng and Chen So-sing, respectively. The new government was established in the former buildings of the Provincial Advisory Council, whose chief had been Tian Yin Kai, who was dismissed. The council itself was abolished. Among the Manchu documents found by the revolutionaries were some copies of a petition begging for the opening of parliament. The original had been written in blood by Shu Teli, who is now Commissioner of Education in the Soviet government. Shu had cut off the end of his finger, as a demonstration of sincerity and determination, and his petition began, begging that parliament be opened. I bid farewell to the provincial delegates to Peking by cutting my finger. The new Tutu and Vice Tutu did not last long. They were not bad men, and had some revolutionary intentions, but they were poor and represented the interests of the oppressed. The landlords and merchants were dissatisfied with them. Not many days later, when I went to call on a friend, I saw their corpses lying in the street. DNYNKAI had organized a revolt against them, as representative of the Hunan landlords and militarists. Many students were now joining the army. A student army had been organized, and among these students was Tiang Shengxia. I did not like the student army. I considered the basis of it too confused. I decided to join the regular army instead, and help complete the revolution. The Qing emperor had not yet abdicated, and there was a period of struggle. My salary was 7 yuan a month, which is more than I get in the Red Army now. However, end of this I spent 2 yuan a month on food. I also had to buy water. The soldiers had to carry water in from outside the city, but I, being a student, could not condescend to carrying, and bought it from the water peddlers. The rest of my wages were spent on newspapers, of which I became an avid reader. Among journals then dealing with the revolution was the Shangcheng Jipao Shang River Daily News. Socialism was discussed in it, and in these columns I first learned the term. I also discussed socialism, really social reformism, with other students and soldiers. I read some pamphlets written by Qiang Kang about socialism and its principles. I wrote enthusiastically to several of my classmates on this subject, but only one of them responded in agreement. There was a Hunan miner in my squad, an Iron smith, whom I liked very much. The rest were mediocre, and one was a rascal. I persuaded 2 more students to join the army, and came to be on friendly terms with the platoon commander and most of the soldiers. I could write, I knew something about books, and they respected my great learning. I could help by writing letters for them or in other such ways. The outcome of the revolution was not yet decided. The Qing had not wholly given up power, and there was a struggle within the Kuomintang concerning the leadership. It was said in Hunan that further war was inevitable. Several armies were organized against the Manchus and against Yuan Shikai. Among these was the Hunan army. But just as the Hunanese were preparing to move into action, Sun Yat-sen and Yuan Shikai came to an agreement. The scheduled war was called off. North and South were unified, and the Nanking government was dissolved. Thinking the revolution was over, I resigned from the army and decided to return to my books. I had been a soldier for half a year. I began to read advertisements in the papers. Many schools were then being opened and used this medium to attract new students. I had no special standard for judging schools. I did not know exactly what I wanted to do. An advertisement for a police school caught my eye and I registered for entranced it. Before I was examined, however, I read an advertisement of a soap-making school. No tuition was required. Board was furnished and a small salary was promised. It was an attractive and inspiring advertisement. It told of the great social benefits of soap-making, how it would enrich the country and enrich the people. I changed my mind about the police school and decided to become a soap maker. I paid my $1 registration fee here also. Meanwhile, a friend of mine had become a law student and he urged me to enter his school. I also read an alluring advertisement of this law school, which promised many wonderful things. It promised to teach students all about law in 3 years and guaranteed that at the end of this period they would instantly become mandarins. My friend kept praising the school to me, until finally I wrote to my family, repeated all the promises of the advertisement, and asked them to send me tuition money. I painted a bright picture for them of my future as a jurist and mandarin. Then I paid $1 to register in the law school and waited to hear from my parents. Fate again intervened in the form of an advertisement for a commercial school. Another friend counseled me that the country was in economic war, and that what was most needed were economists who could build up the nation's economy. His argument prevailed and I spent another $1 to register in this commercial middle school. I actually enrolled there and was accepted. Meanwhile, however, I continued to read advertisements, and one day I read one describing the charms of a higher commercial public school. It was operated by the government, It offered a wide curriculum, and I heard that its instructors were very able men. I decided it would be better to become a commercial expert there, paid my dollar and registered, then wrote my father of my decision. He was pleased. My father readily appreciated the advantages of commercial cleverness. I entered this school and remained for 1 month. The trouble with my new school, I discovered, was that most of the courses were taught in English, and, in common with other students, I knew little English. Indeed, scarcely more than the alphabet. An additional handicap was that the school provided no English teacher. Disgusted with this situation, I withdrew from the institution at the end of the month and continued my perusal of the advertisements. My next scholastic adventure was in the first provincial middle school. I registered for $1, took the entrance examination, and paused at the head of the list of candidates. It was a big school, with many students, and its graduates were numerous. A Chinese teacher there helped me very much. He was attracted to me because of my literary tendency. This teacher lent me a book called the Upi Tungshen Chronicles with imperial commentaries, which contained imperial edicts and critiques by Ch. Lung. About this time a government magazine exploded in Changsha. There was a huge fire, and we students found it very interesting. Tons of bullets and shells exploded, and gunpowder made an intense blaze. It was better than firecrackers. About a month later Tianyin Kai was driven out by Yuan Shi Kai, who now had control of the political machinery of the republic. Tiang Shangming replaced Tianyin Kai and he set about making arrangements for Yuan's enthronement in an attempted restoration of the monarchy, which speedily failed. I did not like the first middle school. Its curriculum was limited and its regulations were objectionable. After reading Upi Tiangchen I had also come to the conclusion that it would be better for me to read and study alone. After 6 months I left the school and arranged a schedule of education of my own, which consisted of reading every day in the Hunan Provincial Library. I was very regular and conscientious about it, and the half year I spent in this way I considered to have been extremely valuable to me. I went to the library in the morning when it opened. At noon I paused only long enough to buy and eat 2 rice cakes, which were my daily lunch. I stayed in the library every day reading until it closed. During this period of self-education I read many books, studied world geography and world history. Therefore the first time I saw and studied with great interest a map of the world. I read Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, and Darwin's Origin of Species, and a book on ethics by John Stuart Mill. I read the works of Rousseau, Spencer's Logic, and a book on Loredan by Montesquieu. I mix poetry and romances, and the tales of ancient Greece, with serious study of history and geography of Russia, America, England, France, and other countries. I was then living in a guild house for natives of Shangshan district. Many soldiers were there, also retired or disbanded men from the district, who had no work to do and little money. Students and soldiers were always quarreling in the guild house, and one night this hostility between them broke out in physical violence. The soldiers attacked and tried to kill the students. I escaped by fleeing to the toilet, where I hid until the fight was over. I had no money then, my family refusing to support me unless I entered school, and since I could no longer live in the guild house I began looking for a new place to lodge. Meanwhile, I had been thinking seriously of my career, and had about decided that I was best suited for teaching. I had begun reading advertisements again. An attractive announcement of the Hunan Normal School now came to my attention, and I read with interest of its advantages: no tuition required, and cheap board and cheap lodging. 2 of my friends were also urging me to enter. They wanted my help in preparing entrance essays. I wrote of my intention to my family and I received their consent. I composed essays for my 2 friends, and wrote one of my own. All were accepted in reality, therefore, I was accepted 3 times. I did not then think my act of substituting for my friends an immoral one. It was merely a matter of friendship. I was a student in the normal school for 5 years, and managed to resist the appeals of all future advertising. Finally I actually got my degree. Incidents in my life here, in the Hunan Provincial First Normal Teachers Training School, were many, and during this period my political ideas began to take shape. Here also I acquired my first experiences in social action. There were many regulations in the new school and I agreed with very few of them. For one thing, I was opposed to the required courses in natural science. I wanted to specialize in social sciences. Natural sciences did not especially interest me, and I did not study them, so I got poor marks in most of these courses. Most of all, I hated a compulsory course in still life drawing. I thought it extremely stupid. I used to think of the simplest subjects possible to draw, finish up quickly and leave the class. I remember once drawing a picture of the half sun, half rock, asterisk, which I represented by a straight line with a semicircle over it. Another time during an examination in drawing, I contented myself with making an oval. I called it an egg. I got such in drawing, and failed. Fortunately, my marks in social sciences were all excellent, and they balanced my poor grades in these other classes. A Chinese teacher here, whom the students nicknamed Yuan the Big Beard, ridiculed my writing and called it the work of a journalist. He despised Liang Chicho, who had been my model, and considered him half literate. I was obliged to alter my style. I studied the writings of Han Yu, and mastered the old classical phraseology. Thanks to Yuan the Big Beard, therefore, I can today still turn out a passable classical essay if required. The teacher who made the strongest impression on me was Yang Chiang, too, a returned student from England, with whose life I was later to become intimately related. He taught ethics. He was an idealist and a man of high moral character. He believed in his ethics very strongly and tried to imbue his students with the desire to become just, moral, virtuous men, useful in society. Under his influence, I read a book on ethics translated by T.S. A.I. Yuan P. and was inspired to write an essay which I entitled The Energy of the Mind. I was then an idealist, and my essay was highly praised by Professor Yang Chiang from his idealist viewpoint. He gave me a mark of 100 for it. A teacher named Tiang used to give me old copies of Minpao People's Journal, and I read them with keen interest. I learned from them about the activities and program of the Tiang Menghui. One day I read a copy of the Minpao containing a story about two Chinese students who were traveling across China and had reached Tatsinlu, on the edge of Tibet. This inspired me very much. I wanted to follow their example, but I had no money, and thought I should first try out traveling in Hunan. The next summer I set out across the province by foot, and journeyed through 5 counties. I was accompanied by a student named Xiaoyu. We walked through these 5 counties without using a single copper. The peasants fed us and gave us a place to sleep. Wherever we went we were kindly treated and welcomed. This fellow, Xiaoyu, with whom I traveled, later became a Kuomintang official in Nanking, under Yi Pei Chi, who was then president of Hunan Normal School. Yi Pei Chi became a high official at Nanking and had Xiaoyu appointed to the office of custodian of the Peking Palace Museum. Xiao sold some of the most valuable treasures in the museum and absconded with the funds in 1934.5. Feeling expansive and the need for a few intimate companions, I one day inserted an advertisement in a Changsha paper inviting young men interested in patriotic work to make a contact with me. I specified youths who were hardened and determined, and ready to make sacrifices for their country. To this advertisement I received 3½ replies. One was from Lu Changlong, who later was to join the Communist Party and afterwards to betray it. 2 others were from young men who later were to become ultra-reactionaries. The half reply came from a non-committal youth named Li San. Li listened to all I had to say, and then went away without making any definite proposals himself, and our friendship never developed. But gradually I did build up a group of students around myself, and the nucleus was formed of what later was to become a society that was to have a widespread influence on the affairs and destiny of China. It was a serious-minded little group of men, and they had no time to discuss trivialities. Everything they did or said must have a purpose. They had no time for love or romance, and considered the times too critical and the need for knowledge too urgent to discuss women or personal matters. I was not interested in women. My parents had married me when I was 14 to a girl of 20, but I had never lived with her and never subsequently did. I did not consider her my wife and at this time gave little thought to her. Quite aside from the discussions of feminine charm, which usually play an important role in the lives of young men of this age, my companions even rejected talk of ordinary matters of daily life. I remember once being in the house of a youth who began to talk to me about buying some meat, and in my presence called in his servant and discussed the matter with him, then ordered him to buy a piece. I was annoyed and did not see that fellow again. My friends and I preferred to talk only of large matters, the nature of men, of human society, of China, the world, and the universe. We also became ardent physical culturists. In the winter holidays we tramped through the fields, up and down mountains, along city walls, and across the streams and rivers. If it rained, we took off our shirts and called it a rain bath. When the sun was hot, we also doffed shirts and called it a sun bath. In the spring winds, we shouted that this was a new sport called wine bathing. We slept in the open when frost was already falling, and even in November swam in the cold rivers. All this went on under the title of body training. Perhaps it helped much to build the physique which I was to need so badly later on in my many marches back and forth across South China, and on the long march from Jiangxi to the northwest. 6. I built up wide correspondence with many students and friends in other towns and cities. Gradually I began to realize the necessity for a more closely knit organization. In 1917, with some other friends, I helped to found the Sinmin Suhui. It had from 70 to 80 members, and of these many were later to become famous names in Chinese communism and in the history of the Chinese Revolution. Among the better-known communists who were in the Sinmin Suhui were Lo Man, Li Weihan, now secretary of the party organization committee; Sha Si, now in the Second Front Red Army; Ho Shuheng, who became High Judge of the Supreme Court in the Central Soviet regions and was later killed by Chiang Kai-shek, 1935; Kuo Liang, a famous labor organizer, killed by General Ho Chen in 1930; Xiao Chucheng, a writer now in Soviet Russia; Tsai Ho-sen, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, killed by Chiang Kai-shek in Yitiantou. Ye Liyun, who became a member of the Central Committee, and later betrayed to the Kuomintang and became a capitalist trade union organizer; and Xiao Chen, a prominent party leader, one of the 6 signers of the original agreement for the formation of the party, who died not long ago from illness. The majority of the members of the Sinmin Suhui were killed in the counter-revolution of 1927. Another society that was formed about that time, and resembled the Sinmin Suhui, was the Social Welfare Society of Hup. Many of its members also later became communists. Among them was Yan Taiying, who was killed during the counter-revolution by Chiang Kai-shek. Lin Piao, now president of the Red Army University, was a member. So was Chang Hao, now in charge of work among white troops, those taken prisoner by the Reds. In Peking there was a society called Hushe, some of whose members later became Reds. Elsewhere in China, notably in Shanghai, Hangzhou, Hangzhou, and Tientsin section, radical societies were organized by the militant youth then beginning to assert an influence on Chinese politics. Most of these societies were organized more or less under the influences of Sin Ch and New Youth, the famous magazine of the literary Renaissance. Edited by Ch and 2Cu. I began to read this magazine while I was a student in the normal school and admired the articles of Shi and Ch and 2Cu very much. They became for a while my models, replacing Liang Chi and Kang Yu Wei, whom I had already discarded. At this time my mind was a curious mixture of ideas of liberalism, democratic reformism, and utopian socialism. I had somewhat vague passions about 19th century democracy, utopianism, and old-fashioned liberalism, and I was definitely anti-militarist and anti-imperialist. I had entered the normal school in 1912. I was graduated in 1918.